This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. We spend majority of today's show hearing from K-State expert and Ukraine native Antonina Broyaka. During our first segment of this Tuesday's programming, she reflects on the one-year anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, her journey with her children to K-State, and the impacts of the war so far. Antonina continues by providing us with more insight on the significant role that infrastructure and exports have played in supporting not only the agricultural industry of the war-torn country, but the entirety of Ukraine itself. We end today's show with K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk encouraging producers to evaluate the mixing and delivery of Total Mixed Rations to their cows. He also emphasizes that producers need to be paying attention to feed moisture, accuracy of feed delivery, and consistency of the mix. That and more is coming up ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. Last month, the 24th of February, marked the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Over 365 days of conflict has tremendously impacted Ukraine as a country and led to the loss of tens of thousands of lives. Joining us to reflect on 1 year of war in her home country is K-State's very own Antonina Broyaka. She joins us now to share insight on how the war led her back to K-State and the devastating impact that it has had so far.
My name is Antonina Broyaka, and I'm originally from Ukraine. Unfortunately, this is a year since the full-scale Russian war in Ukraine has begun, and this is a year since I'm here in Kansas. I really appreciate all help and all support that I've got here at Kansas State University, especially on Ag-Econ department, and that I have opportunity to spread the information about what is going on in Ukraine. Few words about how I got here a year ago. That was a really hard journey. We woke up from the sound of bombing that morning, and we didn't know what to do and where to run and what will be the future. And after sitting several days in the shelters with my children, we decided that I need to go somewhere and keep them in a safe place. And we literally walked to Poland through the Polish border, spent some time there, and then we arrived here to Manhattan, Kansas. So I continued to share the information about Ukraine. So unfortunately, the year of this horrible war in Ukraine brought a lot of damage, a lot of deaths to my country. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the influence of the war on Ukrainian agriculture, and specifically on a wheat market, flour market, and corn market. As for now, Crimea and four southeast region of Ukraine are still occupied, and Russia is desperately trying to seize more territory, but our brave military are not allowing this to happen. Unfortunately, the price for freedom from Soviets and independent democratic development is too high. Since the beginning of the war, more than 8,000 civilians killed, among them almost 500 are children. More than 13.5 thousand civilians been wounded, among them almost 1,000 children. More than 16,000 children were kidnapped and illegally deported to Russia. Ukraine lost 11,000 soldiers. At the same time, Russia lost 155,000 troops, and they don't care how much more they will lose and how much more money they will spend on war instead of investing in the development of their own economy. As of January 2023, the total amount of damage to Ukraine's infrastructure as a result of full-scale invasion is estimated at $140.2 billion at replacement cost. The direct losses of agricultural producers are estimated at $7.8 billion. The The biggest losses are recorded in agricultural machinery, finished products, grain storages. The estimate of indirect losses is $30.2 billion. The biggest losses are in the crop production and price reduction categories. 16% of all cultivated area are still on occupied territory. Another 3.8 million hectares, or 13.4%, cannot be sown due to closeness to the front line remains of shells and mines.
Antonina goes on to explain that the entire agricultural industry in Ukraine has experienced drastic impacts because of this war. She describes the significant production declines by industry type.
The consequences of the war affected every sphere of agriculture in Ukraine. According to the results of 2022, the production of grain crops decreased by 37% compared to the previous record harvest of 2022 and amounted to 53.4 million tons. The production of oil crops was reduced by 24% and amounted to 17.5 million tons. This is caused not only by the reduction of the cultivated areas, but also the yield decrease and the extended harvest. The livestock industry was less affected than crop production, but there are also significant negative impacts. According to the result of 2022, the production of meat of all types decreased by 11% compared to 2021 and was at the level of 3 million tons. Milk, 7.7 million tons, minus 12%. Eggs, 11.6 billion pieces, minus 18%. The main reason for the reduction in this sphere are occupation and destruction of production facilities, physical death of part of livestock during hostilities, and temporary disruption of the production chain on providing growing livestock at the beginning of the war. That was mainly related to poultry farming.
The Ukraine native describes how significant the role of infrastructure has been in this war. She clarifies that while production has been heavily impacted, it's the consequences of blocking Ukrainian seaports that has led to the greatest agricultural losses.
A quite logical consequence of the reduction in production volumes is a reduction in export. However, the main reason is not in production, but in the blocking of seaports by Russian troops, which were a traditional export route for Ukraine. Only thanks to the unblocking of the 3 out of 18 Ukrainian ports and the development of alternative routes through the western borders, it was possible to achieve relatively good results in the current circumstances. According to the result of 2022, 38.4 million tons of grain were exported, which is 24% less than in 2021. 7.9 million tons of oil crop, or 2.1 times more, and 4.6 million tons of vegetable oil, which is minus 17%. The dynamics of growth of the export of oil crops is explained by the decrease of the export of products of their processing, mainly sunflower oil and cake, and the need for farmers to receive funds for their future activities. However, this trend is negative for Ukrainian economy as the production and export of value-added products decreases. The most painful and significant problem for the further activities of Ukrainian agricultural producers is the increase in the gap between world and domestic prices. If before the war this gap was about $40 per ton, now it is about $150 per ton for grain. And these are additional costs of the manufacturer, which includes logistic costs, insurance, and all risks that are now borne only by the Ukrainian side. In such conditions, there is no profitability of production, and this directly affects the next sowing campaign, which will be extremely difficult due to limitation of financial resources.
Antonina emphasizes the important role that agriculture continues to play beyond just her home country's economy.
Agricultural sector was always the driver of Ukrainian economy, and before the war, the share of agriculture in Ukrainian GDP amounted more than 10%. Despite the decrease in the gross agricultural production in monetary terms to $19 billion, the share of agriculture in GDP increased to 13%. This is explained by significantly higher losses in other sectors of the economy, especially damages of industrial and processing enterprises. Ukrainian agriculture remains the most important branch that fills the budget of Ukraine, feeds Ukrainians and many other countries. Therefore, supporting agriculture is extremely important.
Once again, that was K-State agricultural economist Antonina Broyaka providing insight on the impacts of Russia's invasion on Ukraine and the ongoing war. We're cutting to a short break now, but when we return, we will hear more from Antonina Broyaka about the significant role of infrastructure, such as seaports, on the country's ability to export agricultural products. The most significant seaports being those out of the Black Sea, the access to which is only available through an agreement with Russia that is set to end later this month. She shares insight on the anticipated impacts of that agreement ending and what it would take for Russia to agree to prolong that agreement. We'll hear about that and more ahead on Agriculture Today. You're tuned back into Agriculture Today, and we're joined again by K-State agricultural economist Antonina Broyaka. She continues her coverage on the devastating impacts that Russia has had on her home country of Ukraine. She continues with information on the progress of field work in Ukraine despite the ongoing war.
For the first time in the history, Ukraine is continuing to harvest. Some corn crops are still on the field. Even though we harvested totally 98% of planted area, the harvested area is 29% less than pre-war time. As for now, we harvested almost 27 million tons of corn. The harvested area of corn is 25% less than in 2021. And 5% less than planted. I'm not sure that those 5% will be harvested. The harvested area is almost done, but it's of course decreased except for buckwheat, soybean, and rapeseed. Those crops actually partially replaced loss of winter crops. Average yields per hectare also decreased due to the non-compliance with agricultural technologies, decrease in seed quality, and not following the vegetation calendar. By the end of the 2022, we had harvested only 21.4 million tons of corn, and it was a big question, would be the rest harvested? But despite the lack of economic efficiency, most of Ukrainian farmers decided to harvest corn in order to provide more grain to the market and feed people and animals, and to return at least some input cost, and of course to clean the field. Many different estimates were made, and of course the situation is so unstable that is really difficult to make any prediction. Finally, we harvested 7 million tons less of sunflower seeds, which is the lowest level for the last decade. The production of barley dropped almost twice. The wheat harvest was reduced by a third. compared to the previous year. From the restoration of its independence from the Soviet Union, Ukraine had a continuous increasing tendency for the grain, legumes, and oil crop production. This was reflected in corresponding increase in export, and even the beginning of the Russian military aggression in Donbass and the annexion of Crimea in 2014, we couldn't stop this growth. Of course, this couldn't annoy Russia, and they wanted to capture and take over our production and export potential. Unfortunately, grain, legumes, and oilseed production fell from 106 million tons in 2021 to 72 million tons in 2022. Export also decreased, but not so much, since we continued to export in 2022 our ending stocks from the previous harvest. This year forecast is not optimistic. The spring just began in the southern region, and according to the preliminary estimates, the southern area under grain crops in 2023 will amount to 8.7 million hectares, which is 22% less than in 2022 and 45% less than in 2021. At the same time, the area under oilseeds is projected at 9.7 million hectares, which is 32% more than in 2022 and 9% more than in 2021. This is the first time when the sown area under oilseeds will be larger than under grain crops. The maximum production of grain, legumes, and oil crop that we can expect, that is 65 million tons. Accordingly, export will be also lower, and we expect it within 45 million metric tons.
Antonina highlights the current standing of exports in Ukraine and the positive impacts of value-added production for the war-torn country.
So, several words about our export. Even though our monthly export of grain and legumes in February 2023 reached previous year, we are still behind our export potential, at least for 25%. This year, in February, we exported more wheat and barley than in February 22. We also exported significant amount of wheat flour, 16.3 million tons this month. So this is actually a positive sign of working milling industry and higher income from value-added production. Since July 2022, Ukraine exported totally 32 million tons of grain and legume. The main sales channel is operating Black Sea ports. Almost 35 million tons of agricultural products were exported from Ukraine to other countries since the beginning of the war. At the same time, it is the most unstable sales channel due to constant Russian negative influence on the Black Sea Grain Initiative and delay with vessels inspections in both directions, from or to Ukraine. The capacity of Odessa 3 ports is minimum 6 million tons, but we roughly reached 5 million tons per month. And no matter how hard Ukraine tries, the capacity of railway border crossing, destruction of railway infrastructure, shortage of grain carriers, and power outage still do not allow the railway to increase exports much above 1 million ton per month. Corn continues to dominate the structure of Ukrainian export. Since the beginning of the war, we exported more than 21 million tons of corn, which is mostly from the previous year harvest. Wheat was export share is twice less than corn. Third place is occupied by sunflower oil export, which exceeded 4 million tons, and export for all commodities has increased since August when Black Sea Grain Initiative was implemented.
Antonina emphasizes the important role that Ukrainian agriculture continues to play beyond just her home country's economy.
Talking about Black Sea Grain Initiative, I would like to remind that it has been extended in November for another 120 days, and its ending day is March 19. It provides a lot of uncertainty because Russia is again trying to block it. Ukraine's side is willing to extend this agreement for not only another 100 days, but minimum for a year or indefinitely. And another proposal is to include Mykolaiv port, which is second the biggest port in Ukraine with annual capacity around 30 million tons per year. Then monthly export through Black Sea ports can be increased up to 8 million tons. But the Russian side emphasized that the extension of the packaged grain agreement is possible only if the interests of Russian producers of agricultural products and fertilizers are considered in terms of unhindered access to the world market.
She concludes with insight on the economic impacts on the grain markets in Ukraine and the negative ongoing consequences of the war that they continue to face.
The war made huge impact on the grain prices. Even we observed several jumps since the beginning of the war. In general, they have a decreasing tendency, especially during the last months. Today's prices for wheat, barley, and corn are even lower than a year ago before the war started. Unfortunately for Ukrainian producers, the price for Ukrainian wheat is the lowest, and lately was on the level $290 per ton. And Ukrainian corn was sold for $165 per ton. As I said, all grain prices have now decreasing tendency. Cash market is traditionally higher than futures market, and American wheat was traded on $255 per ton on the futures market and $292 on cash market. So that is about our results of the year of the war and its impact of the agriculture in Ukraine.
Once again, that was K-State agricultural economist Antonina Broyaka providing an overview of the agricultural effects of the ongoing war between Russia and the Ukraine. We'll be back with more shortly on Agriculture Today.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. We end today's program with this week's milk lines. Feeding a total mixed ration, or TMR, that contains all the feeds and nutrients the cow needs is an effective and efficient way to feed dairy cows. K-State dairy specialist Mike Brouk encourages producers to evaluate the mixing and delivery of TMRs to their cows, paying close attention to feed moisture, accuracy of their feed delivery, consistency of the mix, and the anti-nutritional factors in some of the feed they're using.
As we think about our TMR and we think about evaluating how we're doing with mixing that ration and delivering it to our animals, what are the key things that you consider on your dairy? Do you consider any of it, or does it just kind of happen and you kind of follow feed intakes up and down? What's the accuracy of your feeder? Is that something that you're concerned about on your dairy? How about the mix consistency from the first bit that's dropped off in the bunks to what comes out of the mixer wagon at the end? And then how evenly is that distributed across the bunk? And are there issues with the mix quality? In other words, we've got part of the mix that has larger pieces of hay in it than the others, or maybe clumps of hay or clumps of some of our haylage if we're feeding some haylage. So how big of an issue is this on your dairy? Well, let's think about this. From a nutritional standpoint, one of the most important things that needs to happen on our dairy every day is that Every bite that these animals takes needs to have the same nutritional package in it. That's how we formulated it. But sometimes, because of the way we manage the bunk, we allow the animals to sort the fines out, leave the forage in the bunk, or we just do a very poor job of delivering the mix up and down the feed bunk so that there's inconsistencies in the amount that's delivered different places in the bunk. And keep in mind, when we look at group-fed pens, generally animals eat fairly close to the same part of the bunk day after day. So if we're not delivering evenly across that bunk, that's an issue. So when we think about our ration, many times what people are tempted to do is run out and just grab a sample out of the bunk and send it in. Let's see what the analysis is. Well, that can be an important step, but it probably should be the last step that we actually do. So what should the first steps be? Well, number one, wet feeds, silages, wet corn gluten feed, wet distillers grains, those feeds that contain a lot of moisture, those are the most variable inputs that we actually have in the ration. So, do you actually know what the moisture content or the dry matter content of your wet feeds are? And is that put into your ration balancing program correctly? That should really be the first thing that we work on, making sure that we have an adequate picture of the feed moisture or the feed dry matter of those inputs that are going into the ration. That will increase our accuracy of nutrition the most. Second thing, how accurate is your feeding? Most of our ration tracking programs give us an idea as to whether or not we're actually doing a good job of delivering different parts of the diet into the mixer wagon and the consistency of that. We can track that. We need to evaluate that at least on a weekly basis. If you're training a new person to run that equipment, maybe you need to do that more often during the first few weeks as that person becomes more familiar with the things that you're looking for and what you demand in terms of accuracy in loading those feed ingredients. And then the fourth thing that you should probably look at would be anti-nutritional factors. That's the things like the secondary fermentation, the molds in those wet feeds, maybe some hay that is just of poor quality compared to what we would normally feed in that particular ration. So things that will inhibit dry matter intake. So really those are the first four things to consider when you're trying to evaluate your feeding program. The feed moisture or dry matter, the accuracy of feed delivery, the consistency of mixing, and anti-nutritional factors that we might find in some of the feedstuffs that we're feeding. This is Mike Brouk with K-State Research and Extension, encouraging our dairy farmers to take a look at their TMR delivery and accuracy of putting that ration together.
Thanks, Mike. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Samantha Bennett, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.